Hello, and welcome to Restoring Hope, the podcast of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. My name is Patrick Higgins. I'm your host and the Executive Director of Communications for the congregation. Our guest today is Father Dennis Chriszt, who obviously is with the congregation. He's a missionary of the Precious Blood. Father Chriszt, how are you doing today? Thank you for being a guest.
Okay, good.
Well, we are going, Father Chris, we've got a lot to talk about you today. It's a very kind of special subject. So what I'd like to do is just, could you give us kind of your general background, how you happen to commit to the order, and kind of fill in our listeners on who you are?
Well, when I was in finishing seventh grade, Father Pat Patterson was the young associate at my home parish, invited me to spend a week at our high school seminary and check things out. And it was a great way to get away from home for a while.
Okay, okay,
Uh, there were 8 of us from my parish in Cleveland who went to the workshop, and 4 of us ended up being students there. Uh, 13 years later, after graduating from Runnerdale St. Joe's College and Catholic Theological Union, I was ordained.
okay. And
So
so
I've
that
been a
that
member
means
for 43 years.
for
I've
43
been a
years.
priest for 43 years, been a member for 45.
Okay, okay, yeah, that's good to make that distinction when you were ordained versus when you became a member of Missionaries of the Precious Blood. So, Father, today we're here to talk about Missionaries of Mercy. You are a missionary of mercy, and that's a term that's probably not familiar to a lot of our listeners. It wasn't familiar to me. So, could you explain to us what a missionary of mercy is, what you do, and how you came to become one?
Um, Back in, I believe it was 2016, Pope Francis called for a holy year of mercy. And he asked uh, bishops and religious superiors to nominate priests to be missionaries of mercy. And a missionary of mercy is a priest who has special faculties from the Vatican to absolve certain sins that until then only the Pope could absolve. Uh, Now they're very rare sins. The first one is attempting or succeeding at doing bodily harm to the Holy Father.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a serious one, obviously. Yeah, and
Um,
probably a rare one.
yeah, very rare. Uh, the others are desecrating the Blessed Sacrament, taking communion out away from the church without permission in order to do something with it that is not like giving it to the sick or but in some way disrespecting and dishonoring the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. uh, and then there are 2 others that only a priest can commit, and that is a if a priest um, breaks the seal of confession and tells people what he heard or said or what someone said to him, and uh, giving absolution to someone with whom he has engaged in sexual misconduct.
Okay. Okay. So
And
obviously
then there's a
very
fifth
egregious things.
one that a priest or other people could do, and that is making a recording of someone in confession, whether it's the priest, the penitent, or somebody else who planted a listening device uh, in the space where the confession was taking place.
Well, I'm going to get to. I know you can't give us specific examples of the specific sins, but have you ever been called upon to forgive any of those instances?
I was appointed in September. In November, I received the letter of appointment. And in January, the Archbishop of Cincinnati sent a email to all the priests of the archdiocese, And 2 days later, I was contacted by someone for one of those. So since January, I've had one of those specific kinds. I was also contacted by a priest who said, "Since you're a missionary of mercy, would you be willing to do a penance service and talk about reconciliation, the sacrament, at a one day of a parish mission?"
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
he told me there'd be between 35 and 50
You've
people
got
there.
mail.
There were 350.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we had a packed church.
So obviously it's a subject a lot of people were interested in hearing about.
Yes, yes. Uh-huh.
Well, let me, and we should probably make the distinction for our listeners. This appointment by the Pope is not specific to missionaries of the precious blood. It can be a priest of any order. Is that correct?
There's 1,500 of us around the world. Um, every couple of years, the Vatican invites us to a conference in Rome. So I was there in March, and 500 of the 1,500 were there.
So, what was your initial reaction when you were invited by Pope Francis to become a missionary of mercy? I assume that's rare that you would be contacted by the Pope. So, what was your reaction?
Actually, you have to volunteer and you have to be nominated by either your bishop, if you're a diocesan priest, or your
Okay.
religious superior. So, Father um, Steve DeSantos wrote an article about it about a year ago. And at the end of the article, he asked if anybody was interested, they should contact Father Jeff Kirch, the provincial. So I did. And so I was appointed based on his recommendation.
So can you tell us how your formation as a missionary of the precious blood prepared you for the unique work of missionaries of mercy?
I'm not sure it was my initial formation when I was preparing to be ordained, so much as the developments in our spirituality since after I was ordained. Um, uh, I remember when I was vocation director and I was living with some of the men in Dayton, where we had our house of initial formation at the time. And there were two young men who were new, and they turned to me and they said, "Our what impressed you most about precious blood spirituality and the life of Saint Gaspar when you entered the community?" And there were myself and the local pastor were at the table at dinner that day, and we looked at each other and we both laughed. And they said, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "Because the first book on precious blood spirituality was written the year after I was ordained."
Oh,
So we
okay.
never talked about the spirituality of the precious blood until afterwards.
Well, how does that spirituality of missionaries of the precious blood align with Pope Francis's call for a church of mercy?
Uh, one of the four pillars of the spirituality, we call them, is reconciliation. That we're called to share God's mercy with people wherever we happen to be ministering. And that there's many ways to do that. The sacrament is one of them. Um, Bob Schreider, who did a lot of the writing, the initial writing on precious blood spirituality, had two books on reconciliation. One on reconciliation um, on a large scale, like when uh, there's a civil war or something, and large groups of people need to find ways to be reconciled with one another. And one of them more on a personal level of being reconciled with another person or with God. Uh, I was blessed during the years that I served as a formation director to attend two international symposiums on reconciliation in Lima, Peru, one on each of those subjects. Father Bob Schreider was one of the presenters at each one, and there were a number of other speakers who shared reflections on what reconciliation means for missionaries of the precious blood in the world today.
So, in your experience, how do reconciliation and mercy reflect the ministry of the blood?
Quite simply, Jesus shed his blood in order that we might be forgiven and know the mercy of God in our lives. Uh, in many ways, that's the foundation of our spirituality.
So, Father, have you ever counseled people or tried to help someone who felt that they are beyond God's mercy?
The first week after I was got my first assignment, there was a lady who came to confession every day and confessed the same sin. She was behind a screen, so I have no idea who she was. So I can't possibly break the seal that way.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
she confessed the same thing every day. I don't remember what she confessed. The thing I remember is that she said that it was something that had happened 25 years earlier, and she was confessing it every single day. And my counseling to her was, I said, the only sin I've heard you not confess today is that you don't believe that you were forgiven the first time.
And what was her reaction?
Silence.
Okay. Okay.
And I said, 25 years ago, when you confessed this sin the very first time, the mercy of God came to you.
And she just obviously had a hard time accepting that.
She never came to confession to me again with that sin. I don't know if she went to one of the other priests after that, but I know that I never heard her again. Now, there were three other priests at the parish at the time, so she could have gone to somebody else, and it was inappropriate for me to ask anybody else.
Right, absolutely. But hopefully, you got through to her.
And I've used that story in doing parish missions and stuff about how important it is for us to believe that we are forgiven. That when Jesus says there's only one unforgivable sin, and it's to not believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. And I say one of the ways that we do that is when we don't believe that the Spirit of God has poured out God's mercy on us, and we keep holding on to our own sins and not letting God take them away from us.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that people can't accept that they are forgiven the first time? Is it guilt?
Guilt
Is
is a
it
powerful
yeah?
feeling, I think, emotion. And sometimes, uh, sometimes I think we think God is like us in that I wouldn't forgive a person who did that. So why would God forgive a person who did that?
But so let me ask, how do you see the missionaries of mercy? Let's go back to the missionaries of mercy. How do you see them as an extension of the church's outreach to the margins?
Well, I guess I would say part of the people on the margin who that missionaries of mercy are sent to are those specific people who don't believe that they're forgivable. Um, you know, when I was director of vocation ministry for 4 years, towards the end of my term, there was a priest who was starting a doctoral program, and he was doing research into why so few young men seemed interested in the priesthood. And he was asking me a series of questions, and he thought I was going to say that the number one stumbling block was celibacy. And what I said was the number one stumbling block in my experience was many people just don't think they're good enough. And because uh, they judge themselves by their own standards, and their own standards often don't include mercy. Uh, One of the things that many, many times in the pre-Vatican II understanding of God, we seem to think of him as a judge who was out to catch us in our sins.
Yes.
And in the
Yes.
more recent understanding of God, um, that's Pope Francis in particular, but also even uh, all the popes since John the 23rd have spoken about the infinite mercy of God and have talked about how important it is to know that we have a God whose whose mercy trumps his judgment. And so it might not be the smartest thing in the world to forgive me, but God chooses to do so anyway. I always love, there's one line in two of the prophets that is exactly the same, and and God remembers your sins no more. And whenever I happen to preach on that passage, I think of God knows everything. God could remember everything, but the prophet tells us the one thing God chooses to forget is our sins. And that's pretty profound
That's profound, and that's extremely comforting
because
too.
we tend to remember not only our own sins, but the sins of those who have hurt us.
Right, right. Father, in your experience, why do you think people are slow to forgive?
Well, I think the first temptation when we're hurt by someone is revenge. And we think that forgiving somebody lets them off the hook. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
John Paul II, when he visited the man who had attempted to kill him in prison, uh, he forgave him, but he didn't ask the government to release him from prison. He was forgiven, but the consequences of his deed were still there. He still the consequences of what we do are not absolved. The guilt is.
So am I correct to say that there's forgiveness, but there's still
Yes,
justice
yeah,
to
yeah,
be?
yeah.
Okay.
And that forgiveness
Okay.
doesn't mean what you did was okay. It means that I'm not going to hold it against you the rest of your life.
Okay. Which is difficult to do. It is difficult to do, which is, I guess, why I'm not God.
Sure.
Why no one else is
When
God.
I attended the first international symposium on reconciliation in Peru, one of the speakers, who I will never forget, Vilma, was from Chile, and during the Pinochet dictatorship, soldiers came to her house at 2 o'clock in the morning and grabbed her son, who was probably 19 years old or so, took him away, and she never saw him again. After the dictatorship was overthrown and peace and reconciliation process was begun, she volunteered as one of the people who would listen to the stories of both the victims of the atrocities that happened, as well as to listen to the stories of some of the perpetrators who wanted to express their sadness and their how sorry they were for what they did. And she said a young man who had been a soldier during those years came to talk to her, and it was just by chance that they were assigned to speak to each other, and they met 2 or 3 times. And uh, the next time they met, he said, "I have one more thing I need to tell you." He said, "I was the soldier who grabbed your son and pushed him out of a helicopter over the Pacific Ocean. And she said, I wanted to hate him. She said, but at the previous 3 meetings while listening to his story, I had already come to love him. And so I couldn't hate him.
Yes, that's hard to comprehend because that takes a special
And she said,
person, I
I
guess.
did not do that. She said, only the grace of God could do that. And every time I think about her story, which I repeat often when I'm doing parish missions or retreats, uh, I get a little teary eyed
Yeah,
from, and I can
that would
see
do
her
it.
face as she wept while telling the story. Uh,
Do you know, did they remain in
they did.
contact,
She
or do
said
you
he
know?
used to come and help her with things around her house when they needed repairs. She said, he did not replace my son, but he became another child in my family.
That's the profound. I don't even know what other word there is for it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
profound. That's incredible,
I remember
actually.
one time Dave Kelly telling the story of when
And Dave Kelly, just so our listeners know, Dave Kelly is the director of Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation,
when they
Chicago.
were
Correct.
just getting started, they were checking out different places that were trying to do reconciliation work. And he said he went to a program. I think it was in Milwaukee, uh, and uh, he met some people who were talking about uh, reconciliation and working with the courts. And there was a case where three young men broke into a elderly woman's home, and they didn't hurt her, but they stole stuff and whatever. And two of them uh, were repeat offenders, and so they went through the juvenile justice system. You know, they had a trial and were sentenced to jail and everything. But the third one was a first-time offender, and the judge agreed to let a reconciliation process take place. And so the victim, this woman, and this young man, and several people from each of their families met together and talked about their lives and about what had happened that day. And they agreed that instead of his sentence being sent to juvenile detention facility of some kind, he would mow her lawn every week during the one summer and cut and shovel her snow for one winter, and that would be a way for him to pay her back for the harm he had done. And she said that it was really, really hot one day when he was mowing the lawn. So she went out with some lemonade or iced tea, I don't remember which, sat on the front steps of the house, and uh, they talked some more. And she said, several years later, he's still coming by to mow her lawn and shovel her snow. And now he gets to come into the house when it's cold and have a cup of hot chocolate
Oh,
or a cup of
okay.
coffee or something. And that what started as a victim and a perpetrator of a crime ended up being reconciled and becoming friends. And she too said it can only happen if God is part of the process.
So, Father, let me shift gears for a little bit. Do you incorporate imagery or theology of the precious blood into your ministry of mercy?
I think anytime I talk about reconciliation, that includes the spirituality, the precious blood, whether it's real obvious or less direct. I think it's always there as part of what I do, because over the last 40 some years, it's become a part of me so much that I don't even think about it sometimes. It just comes out. Uh, when I was going back to school in Chicago, um, I was doing volunteer work on Sundays at an African American parish where I had done volunteer work when I was a seminarian. So a number of the people had known me for a long time. And some of them said to me when I celebrated my 25th anniversary at that parish, they said, "You almost never say the words precious blood, but we always know that it's underneath everything you say." And that was one of the nicest things I'd ever heard people in a parish say to me about my ministry.
That's quite a compliment. That really is, and quite a testament to your ability to
And one of the
spread
things
that
about the
message.
African American community was I really learned a lot about precious blood spirituality there, because there are not a lot of songs in the typical repertoire of uh, a European American parish, but there are lots of songs in the Black community that reference the blood of Christ. And singing them week after week after week for years at a time also influenced my understanding of the power of the blood of Christ uh, to save us, to bring us God's reconciling grace, to help us to know the mercy of God at work in our lives. Especially some of the songs that were sung by slaves who were, I mean, they were not yet free, and they still believed that the blood of Christ made them holier than their masters would ever imagine.
Right. Well, you know that since you were that would never have occurred to me. Do you see a distinction along racial lines about how different races worship or celebrate the mass? I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly, but is there a distinction?
In my experience, most of the times there is a difference. I worked in African American parishes on and off as kind of a side ministry while I was doing formation and vocation work. But then I was also pastor of an African American parish for 6 years. And a normal Sunday Mass would go for an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, and no one thought it was long. I'll never forget the first time my parents came to visit. I was helping out in Chicago, and uh, we went to Mass together, and it was 2.5 hours long. And then we went back to where they were staying, and then later that day we were at a fundraising dinner for the parish, at which Maya Angelou spoke. And
Oh, okay.
afterwards, my father said, "When I get back to work tomorrow, people are never going to believe that Mass took 2.5 hours and I wasn't bored."
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. So, why do you think why that distinction? Is it just because of the history or the experience of different races, or why? Because I've never been to a 2.5 hour mass myself either. Um,
Well, I think part of it is the music, uh, but the music, and that they put their whole body into it. Uh, I lived in Africa for 4 months, teaching in the seminary there, and every Sunday Mass was 2.5 hours. Uh, but some of the people who came walked 2.5 hours to get there.
oh,
Uh,
okay.
but the entrance procession included dancing. The offertory procession included dancing. The entire congregation moved with the music. Um, most of most of the mass that I attended in Tanzania on Sunday, it was all in Kiswahili. It wasn't in English, and I don't speak the language. But I could feel the power of the people joining together in such a way of expressing their faith that was so different from anything I had experienced.
It's a, it sounds like those masses are more of actual celebrations. Is that correct?
Those were definitely celebrations. Sometimes um, we use the word celebration about the celebration of the Eucharist, and sometimes if you asked a sociologist if it was a celebration, they'd say no.
Yeah,
Almost no one was
I agree.
smiling, and
Yeah,
no one looked like they were having a good
yeah,
time. But
right. There's a
if you ever
distinction
go
there.
to a Caribbean culture or an African culture, many places in Latin America, you know when they're praying, they're celebrating uh, the presence of God in their midst. And the thing
Oh,
is that
absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like it.
the difference is primarily related to economics, not to race. The poorer they are, the more they know that everything they have comes from God. And they recognize God's mercy at work in their lives on a regular basis. And it's so easy for us who have uh, everything we need and think we have it because we've worked hard to get it. It's much easier for us to not be as grateful to God for the little things. And when you're dirt poor, you're grateful to God for every little thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's yeah, that's quite a distinction there. So, Father, do you think under Pope Francis, and obviously we're in the era of Pope Leo the 14th right now, but do you think that the Church grew in its understanding of mercy under Pope Francis?
I think many people in the church, if they were paying attention to what he was talking about, it was clear that he was much, from the very beginning, that he was much more willing to understand and proclaim God's mercy to people. I think from the very first trip he took, when he went back to talk to the journalists on the plane, and somebody asked him about homosexuality, and he said, "Who am I to judge?" He basically said, "It's up to God, and I know a God who is full of mercy." So that, you know, just a little over a year before he died, the document on mercy came out. The document on blessings came out, in which he said people who need blessings should be blessed, no matter what their situation is. So if they're in their second or third or fourth marriage, if it's two men or two women, and they come up to a priest and ask for a blessing, the blessing is not saying everything is good. The blessing is saying, may God help you. Because no matter who we are, we need that kind of blessing. We need to know that God is with us and that God helps us. You know, Francis said many times that the sacraments are not rewards for good behavior, they're help for sinners who need help.
Yes, yes. So, Father, can I ask you, how can mercy be a prophetic act in today's prophetic act in today's kind of divided and often unforgiving society? How can that be? I don't know if I'm asking that correctly either, but how can mercy, I guess, be a prophetic act? Prophetic, can't pronounce that word, in today's divided and often unforgiving
I
society.
think mercy is especially a prophetic act when the natural inclination is to seek vengeance. Um, I I think about World War II. At the end of World War One, the victors sought vengeance against the people who lost, and the reason World War II broke out was because the people who experienced the vengeance hated the people who won, and after World War II, the victors, at least the United States, did everything we could to rebuild both the people on our sides. So we helped rebuild Great Britain and France, and but we also helped rebuild Italy and Germany and Japan. And here, 70 or 80 years later, the nations that are closest to us were our former enemies. And that never happened before in history. That nations would seek to rebuild their enemies rather than punish their enemies. Uh, so that was a prophetic stance that a government took. And there were people in this country, if you read the history, who thought it was outrageous that we should be sending any help to our former enemies.
Well, and I guess that could also be said about the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. Okay, Father, I'm gonna. We've only got a few minutes left, but I do want to get to the subject of confession. How do you prepare yourself spiritually before hearing confessions?
Part of me would say I don't. I just walk in
Okay,
there
that's
and
that's a great answer.
I remember how I've been blessed by God's mercy. And that's all that it takes for me to remember that I've experienced God's mercy and that it's my job, it's my responsibility. It's also a blessing for me to share that mercy with others.
So, what would you say to someone who's reluctant, afraid, or ashamed to go to confession?
I was a hospital chaplain for 1 year, and I would sometimes walk into the room, and somebody would say, we would have a conversation that might last 3 minutes, might last a half hour. And at the end, they'd say, well, I probably should go to confession now. And I'd say, well, we've already been doing that. The only thing we haven't done yet is I haven't put my hands on your head and said the prayer of absolution. You, by sharing your story, you've already confessed.
All right. Well, thank you, Father Dennis Christ, for talking to us today. As we mentioned, Father Christ is not only a missionary of the precious blood, but he is a missionary of mercy. It's been a fascinating conversation. So, thank you for joining us. We appreciate that. If anyone has questions or wants to learn more about missionaries of the precious blood, we are at preciousbloodus.org, and you can also find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Father Chris, thank you once again for joining us. We've enjoyed the conversation, and
Thank you.
we hope to have you back.
God bless.
Thank you.